Some stories start with a bang, some with a whisper. For Charlotte Charlie Hayes, her last battle began with the
Valor,
low, throaty rumble of Valor's
And
breath
Pouldrain,
and
he
the
pulled
sharp
me from the
slap of a
wreckage.
government envelope against
He
her
never
weathered
left my
kitchen
side.
table. Sunlight streamed
why
through
this
the dusty
matters.
window, painting the small, single-story ranch house in golden stripes. Outside, the Texas fields shimmered, rough, wild, and free. It was a place most people passed without noticing. For Charlie, it was the edge of the world, the only place she ever felt remotely safe since Afghanistan. She reached for her coffee, her hand steady despite the old ache in her shoulder, the one that never quite healed right. Her wheelchair creaked as she rolled it to the window, just in time to catch sight of Valor, grazing at the fence line. Valor wasn't just any horse. He was a mass of scars and muscle, a survivor with a grizzled mane and sharp, intelligent eyes. More than that, he was family, the only soul who knew the depths of her darkness and stayed anyway. Some nights, when the pain got bad, Charlie would rest her hand on his neck and just breathe. They had seen hell together, come back broken together, and somehow, against every odd, found ways to keep living. The letter sat between her and the rest of the day, thick and official. The return address, Department of Defense, made her stomach twist, but she opened it with a soldier's resolve. The words hit her like shrapnel. It has come to the attention of the department that government property, namely the horse-designated Valor, is being held without proper authorization. You are hereby instructed to surrender the animal to military authorities within 14 days. Failure to comply will result in legal action. She read the lines twice, then a third time, her jaw tightening. Valor? Government property? They'd left her half a person, chewed up and spit out by war, and now they wanted to take the only piece that made her whole? No explanation, no apology, just a cold, bureaucratic order. The phone rang. Charlie jumped, cursing under her breath. Hello? The voice on the other end was clipped, businesslike. Is this Charlotte Hayes? She confirmed, trying to keep her own tone flat. This is Colonel Harrington from Fort Sam Houston. I trust you've received the department's communication. Charlie bristled. I got your letter. You're not taking my horse. There was a pause, then a dry chuckle. That's not your decision to make, Miss Hayes. Valor was assigned to you for operational purposes, not personal comfort. You have 2 weeks. Good day. The line went dead. Charlie's hands shook as she slammed the phone down, but she refused to let herself cry. Not for them, not anymore. She rolled outside, squinting into the sunlight until she found Valor waiting at the gate, as if he'd heard every word. She wheeled closer, letting her hand rest against his flank. I won't let them take you. Not now, not ever. As if understanding, Valor pressed his head into her lap, breathing slow and deep, his presence grounding her. A gust of wind rattled the barn roof, carrying the smell of hay and rain. Charlie looked out across the land, her land, and realized that this time the enemy wasn't a Taliban sniper or a roadside bomb. It was red tape, men in suits, a world that refused to see the value in scars, human or animal. The next hours blurred. Charlie found herself pacing, rolling, across the kitchen, calling the only lawyer she trusted, Sarah McCoy, a firebrand barely out of law school, but tough as barbed wire. She left a message, voice low and steady. Sarah, it's Charlie. They're trying to take Valor. I need help. Please call me. She hung up, staring at the old photograph on her fridge. Her in uniform, Valor beside her. Both of them younger and untouched by the storm. The memories came in waves. The heat, the chaos, Valor standing guard while she patched up a bleeding corporal. The wild ride through enemy fire. He had saved her life more than she could count. After the explosion, when she woke up broken, Valor was there. The military doctors had called her lucky. She called it a curse, until she realized that Valor was her reason to keep breathing. By nightfall, she'd heard back from Sarah. "This is insane, Charlie. I'm coming over in the morning. Don't sign anything." Charlie promised she wouldn't, but dread lingered, heavy and cold. A truck pulled into the driveway, headlights slicing through the dusk. Tom Miller, another veteran, climbed out. He looked at her, then at the letter in her lap. "You okay, Charlie?" She held up the paper. "They want him back." Tom's jaw set. Like hell they do. He squeezed her shoulder, a silent show of solidarity. That night, a storm blew in, rain drumming the roof, thunder rattling the windows. Charlie barely slept, Valor standing sentinel in the barn. Every time she drifted, nightmares dragged her back. Sand, blood, the sound of hooves on broken ground, orders shouted over gunfire. But every time she woke, Valor's steady breathing filled the silence, reminding her she wasn't alone. By dawn, Charlie was ready. She rolled to the window, watching the sun rise over Valor's back. "If they want to fight," she whispered, "they're damn well going to get one." In that moment, she understood what was at stake. Valor wasn't just a horse. He was every promise, every sacrifice, every piece of her soul that survived the war. If they wanted him, they'd have to take her too. And for the first time since coming home, Charlie felt something fierce burning inside, a purpose, a battle worth fighting, and the courage to see it through. The morning sun baked the Texas fields into a mirage of gold and rust as Sarah McCoy's battered Subaru bounced down the gravel drive, throwing up a rooster tail of dust behind it. Charlie sat waiting on the porch, Valor dozing in the shade of a scraggly mesquite tree. When Sarah stepped out, she looked tired but determined, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, clutching a leather-bound briefcase that looked entirely too serious for a place like this. Sarah didn't waste time. She read the Department of Defense letter, her jaw tightening with every line. "They think they can just bulldoze over you because you're a veteran and it's a horse," she muttered, shaking her head. "They have no idea what they're up against." Charlie almost smiled at that. "I'm glad you think so." Sarah nodded, snapping photos of the letter with her phone, already making plans. By noon, Tom Miller had joined them at the kitchen table, a half-drunk mug of coffee growing cold in his hand. Tom was solid as a barn beam, gray at the temples, eyes always scanning for threats he could never quite leave behind. "You tell me what you need, Charlie. I'm here." Sarah outlined her plan. "We're filing for an injunction this afternoon," she said, voice brisk and sharp as a cavalry saber. "We'll demand a hearing before they can touch Valor. We'll argue that he's not just property, he's essential for your well-being, and frankly, your survival. The law's not entirely on our side, but public opinion, we can use that." Charlie looked out the window at Valor, who now stood at the fence, ears pricked as if he sensed the battle lines being drawn. "He's more than a horse. They'll never understand unless they hear it from me." Tom nodded. "And you've got us, whatever you need." Within hours, Sarah had filed the paperwork at the county courthouse. The local judge, a grizzled old veteran himself, agreed to an emergency hearing 2 days later. Word spread like wildfire across the small town. By the time the day of the hearing arrived, the courthouse steps were crowded with neighbors, ranchers, kids from the local 4-H club, even a reporter from the Dallas News. Inside, the air was thick with nerves and sweat. Charlie, dressed in her best jeans and a starched white shirt, rolled into the courtroom, head high. Valor waited outside in the shade, watched by Tom. Sarah stood by Charlie's side, her eyes fierce. The government's lawyer, a slick young man in a crisp blue suit, opened the hearing with a flurry of legal jargon. "Valor, serial number 75391, is U.S. Army property. Ms. Hayes was permitted to keep the horse temporarily for rehabilitation purposes, but the animal must now be returned per military regulations." He talked about rules, contracts, and government interests, never once mentioning Charlie's name or Valor's service. Sarah countered, her voice ringing out clear as a bell. Valor is no more a piece of property than a fellow soldier. This horse saved lives in Afghanistan. He's the reason Ms. Hayes is alive. He is her partner, not her possession." The judge listened, stone-faced. "Ms. Hayes," he said, "you have the floor." Charlie's heart thudded so hard she thought it might shake her voice loose, but she gripped the wheels of her chair and looked the judge in the eye. "Your Honor, Valor isn't just a horse to me. In Afghanistan, he carried me through fire, through chaos. When the explosion took my legs, Valor stayed by my side. He kept me alive until help came. When I came home, he was the only one who understood what I lost. Every night, when the nightmares come, he's there. I owe him my life, my sanity, my hope." Her voice broke, but she pushed on. "If you take him, you're taking the last thing I have that's worth fighting for." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The government lawyer shuffled papers, but Sarah leaned forward, eyes shining. The judge nodded slowly. "I see," he said, his gaze softening just a touch. "I'll consider your testimony carefully." Then something happened that no one expected. Valor, who had been standing outside with Tom, suddenly shoved open the heavy courtroom door with his nose. The big horse ambled right down the aisle, hooves clopping on the linoleum, heads turning in shock and awe. He stopped beside Charlie's wheelchair and rested his huge, scarred head in her lap. The room went absolutely silent. Charlie stroked Valor's muzzle, her hands steady now. "This is what they want to take from me," she said, voice quiet but unbreakable. Even the hardest faces in the crowd seemed to melt. The bailiff started to protest, but the judge held up a hand, lips twitching at the corners. Outside, reporters snapped photos. Inside, Sarah seized the moment, highlighting Valor's unique bond with Charlie, his documented acts of heroism, and the psychological harm losing him would cause. The government lawyer looked rattled for the first time. "With all due respect, Your Honor, regulations are regulations." But the judge cut him off. "Regulations were written by people," he said, "and people have hearts." The hearing ended with the judge promising a ruling within days. Sarah, Tom, and Charlie emerged into the afternoon sun where a crowd waited, spontaneous applause erupting. Charlie, shaken but not broken, looked at her friends. "No matter what happens next, we gave them something to remember." Tom clapped her on the back. "This is just the beginning, Charlie." As they headed home, Valor at her side, Charlie felt hope battling her old, familiar fear. Whatever happened next, she wasn't fighting alone. And for the first time since Afghanistan, she believed she just might win. For the first time in weeks, Charlie woke to a rare silence, not the oppressive, anxious kind, but a silence that felt like a gift. The courtroom battle still echoed in her bones, but now, at least for a moment, she could breathe. Sunlight spilled through her window, warming her face, and she lay there a while, listening to the faint morning sounds. Birds in the cottonwoods, Valor's steady munching out by the barn, a distant hum of Sarah's car rolling up the drive. There was a new energy around the ranch, something Charlie hadn't felt in a long time. Since the hearing, neighbors had begun to drop by, some leaving casseroles on the porch, others handing over envelopes with small bills folded inside, and many simply offering hugs or a few words of encouragement. The whole town seemed to know what Charlie and Valor were up against, and maybe for the first time since coming home, Charlie didn't feel so alone. She rolled her chair to the front porch, squinting against the morning light, just in time to see Tom and Sarah unloading groceries from Sarah's car. Tom grinned, waving a loaf of bread in greeting. "You'd think with all these casseroles you'd never have to cook again," he called out, setting the groceries down by the door. Charlie chuckled. "Yeah, but you know these Texans. Someone shows up at your door with food, you take it. It's bad luck to refuse." Sarah set her briefcase aside and dropped onto the porch step, rubbing her tired eyes. "I have some good news," she said, glancing up. The judge granted our injunction. Valor stays until a final ruling. Charlie's chest loosened, just a little. I wish I could say I'm not still worried, she admitted, but I'll take the win. Tom looked over, face softening. One day at a time, Charlie, one day at a time. That day, a group of kids from the local elementary school arrived with their teacher, asking if Charlie would come and talk to their class about Valor. She hesitated at first. Public speaking was never her thing, and the thought of sharing her story in front of a crowd made her palms sweat. But she couldn't say no. Valor was a local legend after all, and maybe her story could help someone else who felt broken. The school gym smelled of floor polish and chalk. Charlie rolled in, Valor walking calmly at her side, his hooves clicking on the linoleum. The kids sat cross-legged, eyes wide. Charlie could see the questions in their faces, the curiosity, even a little fear. She took a breath and began. This is Valor. He isn't just my horse, he's my friend, my battle buddy. She told them about Afghanistan, about nights full of explosions and days spent patching up soldiers. She didn't mention the nightmares, not directly, but she talked about what it felt like to come home different, to carry wounds nobody could see. One little girl raised her hand, voice trembling. "Were you scared?" Charlie paused, considering. "Yeah," she said simply, "I was. But having Valor with me made it possible to keep going. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone help you." Afterward, the kids crowded around Valor, stroking his neck and asking questions. Charlie watched their faces, saw wonder replace fear, and felt something inside her begin to heal. Back at the ranch, days passed in a kind of gentle routine. Charlie and Valor would greet the sunrise together, wandering the pastures as the light shifted from gray to gold. She found herself talking more, sometimes to Tom and Sarah, sometimes just to Valor, her voice blending with the wind. She remembered the desert mornings in Afghanistan, the two of them moving silently before dawn, always watching, always ready. It was in those quiet hours that their bond had truly formed, not just as horse and rider, but as partners. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of red and purple, Tom joined Charlie on the porch. He didn't say much, he rarely did, but his presence was grounding. "I ever tell you about the first time I saw you ride Valor?" Tom asked, voice low. Charlie shook her head. "No," she said, "but I'd like to hear it." Tom looked off into the distance, remembering. "I was a mess. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The noise in my head was like static all the time. Then I saw you, out there on patrol. You weren't scared, you just looked focused. And Valor, it was like he understood everything you wanted before you said it. I thought, maybe, if you could come back from what happened, so could I." Charlie felt tears prick at her eyes. "You did come back, Tom. We both did," she said quietly. As the sky darkened, Sarah appeared, carrying a stack of letters. Notes from strangers, emails from veterans across the country, all saying the same thing. Don't give up. Your fight is our fight too. That night, Charlie lay awake, reading the letters by the soft glow of her bedside lamp. Some told stories of loss, others spoke of hope. Each one reminded her that Valor's story, her story, wasn't just about a single horse or a single veteran. It was about the hidden wounds so many carried, and the unexpected ways healing could begin. Outside, Valor stood beneath the stars, head lifted as if he too was listening to the night. Charlie closed her eyes, letting the quiet fill her, and, for the first time in a long while, drifted into a dreamless sleep. The battle wasn't over, but for now she had found a moment's peace. A soft rain rolled in the next morning, painting the windows with streaks that blurred the view of the fields. The steady drumming on the roof was soothing, almost meditative. Charlie found herself lingering in the kitchen, tracing patterns in her mug of coffee, lost in the rhythm. The quiet was interrupted by the rumble of Tom's old pickup pulling up outside. She watched as he hesitated for a moment in the drizzle, then made his way to the porch, his shoulders a little more hunched than usual. Tom didn't knock. He just stepped inside, boots muddy, jacket beaded with rain. He set a grocery bag on the counter. "Brought you some of that pecan pie from the diner," he mumbled, looking everywhere but at Charlie. "Figured you'd need the sugar." Charlie smiled. "Sit down, Tom," she said, nodding to the kitchen table. "What's on your mind?" He lowered himself into a chair, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee cup. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence was comfortable, filled only by the sound of Valor snorting out in the barn. Finally, Tom let out a long breath. "You ever have those days where you wake up and you're back over there?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, you know you're home, but it doesn't feel like it." Charlie nodded, her throat tight. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I know those days." Tom stared at his hands. "There was a time after I got back, I didn't think I'd make it. Every little sound would set me off. Couldn't sleep, didn't want to eat. My wife tried, but she didn't understand. Nobody did." He hesitated, glancing up at Charlie, searching her face. "Then you showed up at group," he continued. "You and Valor. I remember you just sitting there, not saying much, but he was calm. You were calm. When everyone else was jumping at shadows, you and that horse, you looked like you belonged anywhere." Tom paused, emotion rising in his voice. "I think that's when I started to believe maybe I could get better too." Charlie reached across the table, touching his hand. "You did, Tom. We both did," she said softly. Tom gave a shaky laugh. "Still got a ways to go," he said. "But if it weren't for you two, well, I don't know." The kitchen filled with a gentle, hard-won peace. The rain eased up, the world outside sparkling. For a long while, they just sat together, letting memories settle and fade. Meanwhile, Sarah had been on her own mission. She'd buried herself in legal research, chasing down every precedent and loophole she could find. The little guest room she used during late nights at the ranch had become a fortress of law books, case files, and highlighted printouts. That afternoon, she burst into the kitchen, waving a folder triumphantly. "I found something," she exclaimed, nearly slipping on the wet floor. There was a case out of Colorado a few years back, therapy dogs for veterans. The court ruled they were more than property, that the bond between animal and veteran was unique, vital. Charlie's eyebrows lifted. "Think it'll help us?" Sarah grinned. "It's not perfect, but it's a start. Shows the courts are beginning to understand that what we're fighting for isn't just about ownership, it's about survival." Tom let out a low whistle. Maybe this judge will see it the same way. Just as hope began to bloom, the front door swung open, and in walked Charlie's mother, Lorraine Hayes, a force of nature in a plastic rain bonnet and a faded yellow sundress. She looked Charlie up and down, lips pressed tight, then bustled into the kitchen, hugging her daughter fiercely. "You look too thin," Lorraine announced, shaking her head. "And you've got circles under your eyes. You eating enough?" Charlie rolled her eyes, but couldn't help smiling. "I'm fine, Mom, promise." Lorraine made her way around the kitchen, fussing with pans as if she could drive away the stress with sheer willpower. "I saw you on the news," she said, her tone softening. "All those people outside the courthouse. I was proud, you know. Not just for fighting, but for standing up for what's right." She hesitated, turning serious. "But I'm worried, Charlie. The Army doesn't back down easy. If things get ugly—" Charlie cut her off gently. "I know what's at stake, Mom, but I can't just let them win. Not this time." Lorraine's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, brushing them away briskly. "I raised you stubborn, didn't I?" Sarah watched the exchange, her own expression soft. "Charlie, it might help to have your mom testify. Family is powerful in court. Shows what you're fighting for, what you've lost, what you've gained." Lorraine straightened her shoulders, suddenly all business. "You need me to talk? I'll talk. You want me to shout? I'll shout." Tom snorted, grinning. "You better warn the judge." Laughter eased the tension, at least for a little while.
They ate dinner together, sharing stories and memories, some funny, some raw. Rain drummed gently on the roof. Valor peeked in the kitchen window, ears pricked as if he wanted in on the conversation. That night, Charlie sat at her window, watching lightning flicker far out on the horizon. She thought about Tom's confession, Sarah's research, her mother's pride. The past was never far away, but now, at least, she wasn't facing it alone. Some battles, she realized, were fought not just in courtrooms or on battlefields, but around kitchen tables, in quiet conversations, and in the unspoken love that kept people fighting, even when they were afraid. She closed her eyes, letting herself rest, knowing that whatever the future held, she'd meet it with her friends and family by her side. Thunderclouds brooded on the horizon, heavy and restless. Charlie sensed the tension in the air before she ever saw it on the ground. For a few brief days, her home had felt safe, a rare island of peace. That illusion shattered one morning when she rolled out to feed Valor and found the north fence hanging in tatters, barbed wire twisted, posts ripped right out of the earth. Her heart kicked hard in her chest. The pasture gate, usually chained, was left wide open, swinging in the breeze. Valor, always careful never to wander far from the barn, stood inside the paddock, head high and nostrils flaring, as if he'd been keeping watch all night. Charlie's hands trembled as she checked him over, searching for injuries. Valor nickered, pressed his nose to her shoulder, and let out a deep, wary breath. She saw hoofprints in the mud, not just Valor's, but smaller, sharper prints. Boots. They led up from the road and circled the barn. She dialed Tom, her voice low and tight. "The fence is down, Tom. Someone was here last night." Within the hour, Tom's truck was in the drive. He surveyed the damage, lips pressed to a hard line. "Looks like they cut it on purpose," he said, running a hand along the snapped wire. "We need to call the sheriff." Charlie hesitated, not wanting to appear paranoid, but Tom was already on his phone. As they waited, Sarah arrived, eyes wide as she took in the scene. "This wasn't an accident," she said, her voice shaking with outrage. "They want to scare you." Sheriff Dorsey, an old friend of Charlie's dad, arrived with 2 deputies. He made notes, snapped photos, and promised to increase patrols at night. "Best keep your lights on, Charlie. Lock up tight." Charlie nodded, but dread clung to her. After the sheriff left, she and Tom worked to mend the fence, hands moving in tense silence. "Who do you think did it?" she finally asked. Tom's jaw flexed. "I don't know, but whoever it was, they wanted to send a message." That night, a heavy unease settled in the house. Tom bunked on the couch, shotgun propped by the door. Sarah stayed up late, scanning news stories and legal briefs. Charlie barely slept, one ear tuned to every creak and gust of wind. A few days later, another message came, this time not so subtle. Sarah was driving home from the courthouse, headlights cutting through the twilight, when she noticed a black SUV trailing her, matching every turn. Her pulse hammered as she pulled into a gas station, hoping they'd pass by. Instead, the SUV parked across the lot, engine idling. She called Charlie, voice shaky. "Sarah, get inside where people can see you," Charlie urged. "I'll call Tom. Stay on the phone." Sarah waited inside the gas station until the SUV finally drove off. Tom and Charlie both insisted she stay at the ranch for a few nights. That wasn't the end of it. The next morning, Charlie found a crudely painted message sprayed across the barn door. "Government property. Hand him over." The red paint dripped like blood. Charlie stared at it, cold and furious. "They think I'll give up that easy?" she whispered, balling her fists. Tom reached for her shoulder, grounding her. Sarah called the sheriff again, who promised to open an investigation. But deep down, everyone knew help would be slow to come. Out here, folks handled things their own way. The threats continued. Phone calls in the middle of the night, hang-ups, a brick thrown through Sarah's car window while parked at the ranch. Tom doubled the number of trail cameras, put new locks on every gate, and started patrolling with Valor at dusk. "I won't let them scare us off," Charlie said, more to herself than anyone. The pressure grew. Colonel Harrington, apparently unsatisfied with the slow legal process, was seen in town, meeting with unfamiliar men in dark suits. Word spread quickly in the coffee shops and feed stores. The air grew thick with suspicion. Neighbors offered to help, but Charlie knew most folks were nervous. Nobody wanted trouble with the military. One stormy night, Tom found the barn's side door hanging open, a cold draft blowing through. He swept inside, flashlight beam darting across the hay bales. Nothing missing, but a pile of Valor's tack was dumped out on the floor, reins cut and trampled. Someone had been inside. Tom's face was grim as he reported to Charlie. "They're pushing harder," he said, "trying to rattle us." But Charlie refused to be rattled. Instead, she took action. She and Sarah went to every neighbor within a 5-mile radius, explained what was happening, and asked for their support. A few folks hesitated, but most pledged to keep an eye out. Someone started a GoFundMe to cover legal fees and security cameras. Letters poured in from veterans groups across Texas. Stories of other animals, other fights, other scars. Late one evening, as rain drummed on the roof and wind moaned through the eaves, Charlie sat with Sarah and Tom around the kitchen table. "They can threaten me," she said, her voice fierce, "but they're not taking Valor, not while I'm still breathing." Valor stood just outside, head in the window, calm but alert. Tom poured another cup of coffee. "We'll stand with you, Charlie, whatever comes." Outside, the night pressed close. The enemy wasn't across the ocean this time, it was in her own backyard. But Charlie knew one thing. This fight was just getting started, and she would not back down. The storm rolled in just after midnight, lightning crawling across the sky, thunder rattling the old window panes, and rain coming down so hard it sounded like a war drum on the metal barn roof. Charlie couldn't sleep. The night air buzzed with tension. She lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, replaying every threat, every vandalized fence, every chilling phone call. Her mind was a whirlpool, but one thing was certain. She would not let them take Valor. The wind howled, shaking the house. Valor, restless, moved in his stall, hooves shuffling on the straw. Charlie heard it, felt it deep in her bones. A warning, a message as old as battle. Something wasn't right. She rolled out of bed, pulling a hoodie over her shoulders, and checked her phone. No new messages, but a missed call from a private number blinked on the screen. Sarah and Tom were both asleep in the living room, Tom's shotgun propped by the couch. She hesitated for a split second, then moved quickly, wheeling down the hallway and nudging Tom awake. "Tom, something's off. I don't like this storm." He was up instantly, eyes sharp, all soldier again. "I'll take a look," he whispered, grabbing the shotgun. Charlie wheeled into the kitchen, peering through the back window. The rain was so heavy it blurred everything into a smudged painting, but she could just make out movement by the barn. Her heart skipped. Someone was out there. 2 dark figures, hunched against the wind, creeping along the shadowy side of the building. "Tom, they're here." Her voice cut through the house. Sarah scrambled up, hair wild, fear plain on her face. "Stay inside, lock the doors," Tom barked, already out the back, boots pounding across the mud. Charlie grabbed her phone, dialing 911. The operator's voice barely registered. She rattled off their address, her words tight and fast, hands shaking as she ended the call. Then she moved to the back door, wrenching it open, rain blowing in cold and hard. "Valor!" she shouted. "Hold on, boy!" Lightning flashed, and she saw the intruders. 3 of them now, forcing open the barn door, their shapes illuminated in the brief blue-white burst. Valor reared, eyes wild, whinnying loud enough to cut through the storm. The men scattered, 2 trying to grab his lead rope, the 3rd swinging something, maybe a crowbar, at the stall. Charlie's fury exploded. "Get away from him!" she screamed, propelling herself down the ramp toward the barn. Her wheels bogged in the mud, but she kept going, heart pounding, face soaked and stinging. Tom reached the barn first, shotgun raised. "Freeze!" he roared, voice booming. "Get your hands where I can see them." The men spun, startled. One bolted for the far end of the barn, slipping in the muck. Another lunged for Valor's halter, but the horse jerked away, hooves flying. The third, wild-eyed, faced Tom, who kept the gun steady. Sarah, meanwhile, had grabbed a flashlight and her phone, calling out as she ran. "I'm filming this! Police are on the way!" That threat seemed to break whatever nerve the men had left. The one by Valor turned, tried to run, but slipped and crashed into a feed bin. The others bolted, ducking through the broken back fence, disappearing into the sheets of rain. Tom gave chase, firing a warning shot into the air. The noise was deafening. For a second, all was chaos, Valor thundering in his stall, Charlie stuck in the mud outside, Sarah yelling for help, Tom cursing as he skidded through the darkness. The world snapped back into focus as red and blue lights flickered down the lane. 2 sheriff's cars careened to a stop, deputies pouring out, guns drawn. "Hands up!" one barked at Tom, who immediately dropped the shotgun and raised his hands. "I'm the homeowner," he yelled. "Intruders in the barn." Charlie's voice cut through the confusion. "They tried to take my horse!" Within minutes, the deputies had the scene under control. One of the intruders, limping and bleeding, was caught hiding behind a hay bale. The other 2 had vanished into the storm, but Sheriff Dorsey promised to track them down. Valor, still frantic, paced his stall, nostrils flared, sweat shining on his coat even in the dim light. Charlie wheeled to his side, crooning softly. "Easy, boy, I'm here, you're safe." He pressed his head into her lap, his whole body trembling. She stroked his neck, feeling his heart racing under her hand. "You're okay, I promise." Tom, soaked to the bone, came back inside, shaking his head. "They were ready, Charlie. They knew where everything was. That wasn't random." Sarah hugged herself, eyes darting between Charlie and the barn. "Who would go this far for a horse?" Charlie looked at her, voice steady. "Someone who's afraid of what we'll find if we win." The deputies took statements, snapping more photos, bagging evidence. The rain finally slowed, leaving the night heavy and silent. The barn door hung broken, mud and footprints everywhere, but Valor was safe. For now. They gathered in the kitchen, shaken but together. Charlie's mother called, having heard the sirens from town. "Are you all right?" she demanded. "I'm coming over." Charlie reassured her, promising to call when things settled down. The adrenaline faded, leaving everyone exhausted, but there was no sleep to be had. Before dawn, Tom hammered plywood over the barn door. Sarah sent video footage to the police, and Charlie made sure Valor had fresh hay and water, staying with him until the sun crept over the hills. As the morning light pushed away the storm, Charlie sat beside Valor, a new resolve hardening in her chest. "They want to fight," she whispered. "They just got one." This battle was no longer just about Valor. It was about every veteran who'd been pushed aside, every companion animal threatened, every act of intimidation meant to silence the truth. Charlie looked at her friends, at her horse, at the battered barn, and knew she was ready for whatever came next. News of the attack spread through town before the mud had even dried. By midday, camera crews from 3 different stations lined the front gate, their satellite vans churning up ruts in the roadside grass. Reporters jostled for the best angle, microphones extended, hungry for any new soundbite. Neighbors pulled up chairs on porches and watched the commotion, exchanging theories in quiet voices. Charlie felt the weight of all those eyes, a mixture of support and anxiety pressing in from every side.
She kept Valor close, never leaving him alone for a moment. Tom and Sarah circled the property like sentries. Each day brought fresh calls, from national veterans groups, animal rights activists, and strangers who said they'd seen themselves in Charlie's fight. Flowers arrived by the armload. Letters and emails stacked up on the kitchen counter. Some offered prayers, some cash, but most offered stories. Other battles, other scars. A court date was set within the week, expedited by the sheriff's report and the attention now burning through the internet. "You ready for this?" Tom asked, watching Charlie check the wheels on her chair for the 10th time that morning. "Don't have much choice, do I?" Charlie said, managing a smile. "I'm not letting them win by default." Sarah reviewed her notes one last time, fingers flying over her tablet. "We need to get as many people in that courtroom as possible. Not just veterans, anyone who knows what it means to fight for someone you love." The courthouse was packed, the energy electric. Camera flashes popped as Charlie rolled through the doors, Tom and Sarah flanking her like an honor guard. Valor, sleek and brushed until his coat gleamed, stood outside, surrounded by local kids and volunteers holding hand-painted signs. Valor is family, not property, justice for heroes. Inside, the judge's bench bristled with microphones and legal documents. Colonel Harrington sat at the government table, his face set in stone. His lawyer, a thin man with silver hair and a permanent sneer, shuffled files with the calm of someone used to getting his way. As proceedings began, Sarah called on the community for testimony. The first to speak was Tom. He told the court about Afghanistan, the dust and fire, the way Valor never flinched, the night Charlie saved his life with nothing but grit and the horse's trust. His voice trembled, but he never looked away from the judge. Next came the veterans, men and women from around Texas, some in uniform, others walking with canes or limps of their own. They spoke of invisible wounds, the way an animal's loyalty could pull you back from the edge. Each story echoed Charlie's in its own way. Then Sarah brought in Dr. Lisa Brennan, an animal therapy expert who had flown in from Austin. "The bond between a service animal and a trauma survivor," Dr. Brennan explained, "is not just emotional, it's biological. The presence of that animal regulates stress, lowers blood pressure, and literally changes the chemistry of the brain. Take that animal away, and you risk undoing years of healing." Charlie watched Colonel Harrington as Dr. Brennan spoke. His jaw worked, eyes narrowed. For the first time, she saw doubt flicker there. But it was Sarah's final move that turned the tide. She presented her research, dozens of cases where animals had been recognized as more than mere property. She cited the Colorado precedent, detailing how courts across the country were beginning to rethink old rules in light of new understanding. Finally, Sarah called Charlie to the stand. She rolled forward, facing the judge and the packed gallery. She spoke simply, honestly, letting the words flow from her heart. "I lost a lot in Afghanistan. My legs, my sense of peace, most of my old friends. But Valor, he stayed. When nothing else made sense, he was there. He's not just a horse, not just a piece of equipment. He's the reason I'm still here. If you take him, you're not just taking a companion. You're taking the last of my hope." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the only sound was someone stifling a sob in the back row. Then came the cross-examination. Colonel Harrington's lawyer rose, voice oily and confident. "Ms. Hayes, isn't it true that you signed a contract agreeing Valor was government property?" Charlie held his gaze. "I signed a lot of things after the explosion. I don't remember anyone telling me that meant I'd lose my best friend when the army was done with me." The lawyer pressed harder, trying to poke holes, but Charlie stayed steady. The crowd watched, holding its breath. Finally, it was Colonel Harrington's turn. Sarah's eyes glinted as she began her questioning. "Colonel, can you explain why you personally ordered the retrieval of Valor when the department has hundreds of retired service animals?" The colonel's lips thinned. "It's a matter of discipline," he said. "Is it also true that several of your subordinates reported you threatened their careers if they refused to help retrieve Valor?" Sarah's voice was gentle, but the courtroom bristled. "Objection," the government lawyer barked, but the judge waved him off. "Answer the question, Colonel," the judge ordered. For the first time, Harrington looked rattled. Sarah continued, revealing evidence of the colonel's pressure on staff, aggressive tactics, and even hints that he'd been involved in other questionable removals of animals from veterans. By the time she was finished, The whole room felt as if it was holding its breath. The judge called a recess. Outside, the crowd surged, voices rising with hope. Charlie stood with her friends, Valor nuzzling her shoulder as camera crews closed in. "Whatever happens," Tom said, "you showed them what real courage looks like." Charlie nodded, letting herself feel that flicker of pride. "Now we wait," she said quietly, "and hope justice knows a hero when it sees one." The courthouse was quieter the next morning, but the tension was so thick it felt like the air itself might snap. News trucks still lingered outside, anchors murmuring into cameras, waiting for a verdict that would ripple far beyond rural Texas. Inside, Charlie sat with Sarah and Tom on either side, her hands folded in her lap, Valor visible through the window, surrounded by supporters who'd returned to see this battle through to the end. It felt like everyone was holding their breath. Sarah checked her phone, scrolling through messages from veterans organizations, reporters, and even a few lawmakers who'd taken an interest overnight. Tom was silent, steady as always, but his knee bounced under the table. The judge entered, his robe flapping, face grave as he looked over the crowded courtroom. Colonel Harrington sat ramrod straight, flanked by his lawyer, his face a stone mask. Charlie's mother clutched her hand, whispering a prayer under her breath. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was slow, careful, each word measured. "I have reviewed the testimony, the evidence, and the law," he began. "But most importantly, I have listened to the stories of sacrifice and resilience, the bonds that have been forged not by contracts, but by courage and compassion." The room was utterly silent. It is clear to this court that Valor is not merely government property. He is a decorated warhorse, a healer, a companion, and, by the truest measure, a hero in his own right. The judge's gaze landed on Charlie. To separate him from Miss Hayes would be a grave injustice. There was a collective exhale. Tears sprang to Charlie's eyes as the words sank in. "Therefore," the judge continued, "I rule in favor of Charlotte Hayes. Valor will remain with her, recognized by this court as a companion animal and war hero, not mere property of the United States government." Someone in the gallery sobbed, and the sound seemed to break a spell. Cheers erupted, reporters surged for the door, and Tom let out a triumphant whoop. Sarah threw her arms around Charlie, laughing and crying at the same time. "You did it," she said. "We did it." Charlie felt Valor's victory like sunlight on her skin. Every ache, every scar, every sleepless night suddenly felt lighter, as if the burden she'd been carrying for years had finally been set down. The judge wasn't finished. "I also direct that this court's findings be reviewed by federal authorities. There are serious concerns about the conduct of Colonel Harrington and his staff, and I recommend an investigation into their handling of similar cases." Harrington's face, so rigid and cold before, now looked waxy and gray. His lawyer began whispering frantically, but the colonel didn't move. Outside, the crowd had already begun celebrating. Someone led Valor forward, and Charlie rolled out to meet him, her hands trembling as she pressed her face into his neck. Reporters crowded close, but for a moment it was just the two of them, the air full of the sense of horse and dust and wild Texas hope. A spontaneous ceremony sprang up, neighbors passing out small flags, children singing a wobbly version of "America the Beautiful." The mayor stepped forward, presenting Charlie and Valor with a homemade plaque, "For courage under fire, on and off the battlefield." Tom clapped her on the back, grinning wider than she'd ever seen. "Didn't I tell you, Charlie? I knew you'd win." Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks, unable to stop smiling. "This isn't just your victory," she said. "It's for every vet who ever felt forgotten, every animal who ever gave more than anyone understood." As the sun climbed higher, news of the ruling spread. National outlets picked up the story. Warhorse wins freedom. And social media exploded with messages of support. Veterans and animal lovers from across the country flooded Charlie's inbox with gratitude and relief. But even in the midst of celebration, the scars of the battle lingered. That evening, federal investigators arrived, their questions sharp and their intentions clear. Colonel Harrington was called into a private meeting and did not return to the courthouse. By sundown, it was clear he'd been suspended pending the outcome of a full investigation. Rumors swirled about intimidation, about abuse of power, about how many others might have suffered under his command.
None of that dimmed the sense of justice that filled the ranch that night. Friends and neighbors gathered for a bonfire, bringing casseroles, pie, guitars, and stories. Valor stood at the heart of it all, the hero of every tale, his presence a living testament to the resilience that had carried them all through. Charlie watched the flames dance against the dark, her friends' laughter wrapping around her like a blanket. Her mother pressed a mug of cocoa into her hand, squeezing her shoulder. "I'm so proud of you," Lorraine whispered. "You never gave up. Not on him, not on yourself." Charlie smiled, the knot in her chest finally loosening. "I didn't win this alone," she said, looking around at Tom, Sarah, her mother, the neighbors, and Valor himself. "None of us ever really fight alone." As the fire burned low, someone started singing an old folk song, voices rising together in harmony. The fear, the threats, the nights spent waiting for another attack, they were all real, but tonight they belonged to the past. Tomorrow there would be new challenges, there always were, but for now there was peace, hard-won, fiercely claimed, and shared among everyone who had stood up and refused to let injustice win. Charlie looked up at the stars, Valor at her side, and allowed herself, for the first time in years, to believe in new beginnings. The days after the trial became a blur of visitors, phone calls, and news stories. Charlie found herself in the spotlight, her battle with the Department of Defense now a symbol of resilience, of the healing power between human and animal, of a veteran's long journey back to herself. She sometimes caught herself watching it unfold as if from a distance, wondering how the girl who came home from Afghanistan shattered and silent could ever become the woman who'd stood up and spoken out, not just for herself, but for countless others. Valor took it all in stride, of course. If he noticed the extra attention, the TV crews filming him graze, the steady stream of admirers bringing him apples and brushing his mane, he didn't show it. He stood as he always had, calm, steady, a living monument to something both ancient and deeply human. One bright morning, Sarah came over carrying a stack of letters and a slim magazine, her face alight with excitement. "Charlie, look!" She opened the magazine to a 2-page article, headline bold across the top. "A War Horse's Triumph: How One Battle Changed a Nation's Heart." Charlie scanned the piece, reading about herself and Valor, how the case had sparked debate in Congress about animal rights, how it had inspired new policy proposals for veterans' mental health, how it had reminded people of the invisible wounds so many carried. She saw her own words quoted, the ones she'd spoken trembling in that packed courtroom, now echoing far beyond Texas. Sarah grinned. "You changed more than just one law, you know. They're talking about national standards for service animals. Your story's going to help vets everywhere." Charlie shook her head, humbled and overwhelmed. "I just wanted to keep my horse," she said. "I never set out to change the world." "Sometimes it works that way," Sarah replied. As the weeks passed, Charlie began speaking at veteran events and local schools. She was never entirely comfortable on a stage. Her voice still sometimes faltered, her palms sweated. But each time, she saw faces light up when she spoke about valor, about the power of fighting for what you love, about how courage often hides in the small, everyday choices. To get up, to ask for help, to hold on when it would be easier to let go. At one event, Tom stood in the back of the auditorium, arms folded, nodding along with every word. Afterward, he met her outside, the late afternoon sun shining in his eyes. "You know, you're the reason I started talking to other vets again," he said quietly.
Most days I still feel like I'm fighting something nobody else can see. But seeing you up there, it helps. Reminds me I'm not alone." Charlie squeezed his hand. "None of us are, Tom. Not really. Not if we keep reaching out." Inspired by Charlie's fight, Tom started a weekly support group for returning soldiers. They met at the ranch at first, drinking bad coffee around the kitchen table, sometimes silent, sometimes laughing until tears rolled down their cheeks. Valor became a regular part of those meetings, quietly nuzzling anyone who needed comfort. Charlie also found herself on the receiving end of countless letters from people she would never meet. Veterans from Iraq and Vietnam, nurses, animal rescuers, teachers. Some told stories of losing everything and slowly, stubbornly finding their way back. Others wrote to thank you. But one line from a retired sergeant in Ohio stuck with her. "It's not about the fight you win, it's about the courage to fight at all."
That line echoed in Charlie's mind for weeks. She saw it in every handshake, every hug from a stranger, every shy smile from a student who just heard her story. She saw it in Valor's patient eyes and felt it in her own pulse, steady now, no longer haunted by fear. Sarah, ever the writer, published her own account of the case, blending legal analysis with the emotional heart of their struggle. Her article was picked up by major outlets and became required reading in a few college classes. She wrote about the power of stories to reshape policy, about how the law must change as our understanding of healing changes, about how animal companions are often the bridge between what was lost and what can be regained. One day, Sarah found Charlie on the porch, Valor standing close by, the summer air heavy with honeysuckle. "I never thought I'd end up here," Sarah admitted, "but I can't imagine fighting for anything more important than this." Charlie nodded, her gaze following a group of young vets arriving for Tom's meeting. "Me neither. We're not just helping veterans, Sarah. We're showing everyone what loyalty and hope look like, how to start over, no matter how broken you are." In quiet moments, Charlie still thought about Afghanistan, about the pain and chaos, about all she'd lost. But those memories no longer drowned her. Instead, she carried them alongside the new ones. Valor leading school kids around the pasture, neighbors pitching in to fix the barn, Tom telling another bad joke, Sarah grinning over a new stack of letters. She had learned that healing was never quick, never easy, never complete. It was a path you walked with others, sometimes limping, sometimes carried, always together. It was a lesson forged in fire, in courtrooms and quiet kitchens, in midnight storms and long Texas sunsets. And as the sun dipped low over the fields, Charlie understood the real victory was not just winning Valor's freedom. It was discovering, in the hardest fight of her life, that every scar had meaning, and every battle, win or lose, had the power to light a way forward for someone else. Years passed, measured not just in calendar pages, but in moments, slow, healing mornings, long golden afternoons, nights filled with laughter and new purpose. The ranch changed, but in ways that felt right, as if every scar and victory had carved something new and beautiful into its bones. Where once it had been only a haven for Charlie and Valor, it was now a place of gathering, a refuge for others who knew the pain of war, the ache of loss, and the struggle to find meaning on the other side. The front gate bore a new sign, Hayes Sanctuary for Veterans and Rescue Animals. Sometimes folks would drive past, slow down, and smile, recognizing the name from the headlines. But most who found their way down the long, winding road were not strangers. They were brothers and sisters in arms, wounded and searching, bringing their own stories, their own battered hope. Charlie had grown older, the years settling gently on her face, hair streaked with silver, but her eyes still sharp with purpose. She rolled the familiar path to the barn each day, her chair leading tracks beside the prints of dozens of hooves. Valor was older too, his once fiery mane now flecked with white, his gait slower but still proud. Yet age only deepened his presence. If anything, he was more legend now, more anchor than ever before. The ranch hummed with life. Dogs romped in the fields, rescued horses nickered greetings, chickens pecked at the steps, and laughter echoed off the fences. Veterans arrived broken and left a little more whole. There were therapy sessions beneath the open sky, bonfires ringed with stories, quiet mornings of coffee and shared silence. Some folks found healing in mucking stalls, others in riding the old trails, a few just in brushing Valor's broad back as he dozed, content. Charlie often found herself sitting with newcomers, sharing her own journey, listening to theirs. Sometimes she saw the haunted look she once wore, eyes that flinched from sudden noise, hands that shook in the quiet. But more often now, she saw hope flickering, small and persistent, in the way people relaxed around the animals, the way trust rebuilt itself, slow and fragile. On the first anniversary of the court victory, they held a ceremony at the ranch, a parade of sorts. Local families, veterans groups, and neighbors all turned out, filling the fields with music, flags, and celebration. Charlie, in her wheelchair with Valor at her side, led the procession. Children waving behind them, rescue dogs in bandanas bounding along. Valor wore a handmade wreath of wildflowers, and when the crowd cheered, he tossed his head with something like pride, basking in the love that surrounded him. During the ceremony, Tom spoke, voice rough with emotion as he looked over the crowd. "We started out just wanting to save one horse," he said, "but we ended up saving each other."
Sarah stood with him, reading from a letter written by a young veteran who had spent a month at the ranch and left changed. A letter that spoke of dark nights and new mornings, of finding family where he least expected it. Later that evening, as the sun set over the hayfields, Charlie found herself alone with Valor at the edge of the paddock. She rested her forehead against his, breathing in the familiar, comforting scent of horse and summer grass. "You did good, old man," she murmured. "You saved more lives than you'll ever know." Valor nudged her gently, as if in answer. For a long time, neither of them moved. There was no need. They had all the time in the world. Inside the house, Sarah finished writing the latest update for their supporters. "The work is never finished," she wrote, "but every story of healing here proves that justice isn't just a verdict in court, it's what we do for each other every day." The ranch grew, not just in numbers, but in spirit. A year turned into 2, then 5. Some faces came and went, others stayed, but all left a mark, on the land, on each other. The barn was filled with pictures, soldiers and horses, therapy dogs and children, sunrise rides and late-night campfires. And in the center of every frame was Valor, steady, patient, beloved. As time went on, Charlie's health changed, and she found herself needing more help around the ranch. But she never stopped working. When she couldn't ride, she taught. When she couldn't lift, she listened. And always, always, she made time to sit with those who needed it most, to remind them that scars, seen or unseen, were not the end of the story. Valor, even as he aged, became something of a legend in the county. He led parades on Veterans Day, calmed anxious children during school visits, stood as silent witness at every ceremony for a lost brother or sister. He was a living symbol, not just of courage in battle, but of the healing that could be found in the aftermath. One crisp autumn morning, Charlie watched Valor lead a group of new arrivals out into the pasture. His step was slower now, but every movement spoke of dignity, of battles fought and won, of peace earned and shared. Charlie sat beneath the old oak tree, reflecting on the years behind and the future ahead. She knew now that true justice was more than a courtroom victory. It was found in the loyalty that endures through hardship, in the hands we reach for in the dark, in the bonds that carry us when we're too tired to go on alone. "If you fight for anything in this world," she told a group gathered around her one evening, "let it be for your friends, your family, your fellow travelers. Sometimes the greatest courage is standing up for someone who can't speak for themselves. Sometimes it's as simple as refusing to let go. As dusk fell, the ranch glowed with warmth. Lights in the windows, laughter in the kitchen, Valor's shadow stretching long across the pasture. Charlie watched it all, heart full, and understood at last. The courage to stand up for a friend, human or animal, was the greatest battle and the greatest victory of all.